Have you ever looked at your spouse across the dinner table and realized you have nothing left to say? Not because you fought, not because something broke between you, but because somewhere along the way, without either of you noticing, the person you loved became just someone you live with. Saint Teresa of Avila saw this happen, not once, but over and over again in the lives of people who came to her for help. She watched loving marriages turn cold, she saw passionate beginnings fade into silent routines, and she understood something most marriage counselors today still miss. The drift does not start with a fight or a betrayal. It starts with something much quieter, much earlier, and far more dangerous. By the time she turned 40, she had reformed 17 convents, written books that would guide souls for centuries, and earned a reputation as someone who could see straight through pretense into the heart of things. People traveled weeks on horseback just to confess to her, to ask her guidance, to hear what she saw when she looked at their lives. Among those people were married couples, husbands and wives who felt something dying inside their homes but could not name it. Teresa could name it. She called it the slow death of attention. National de España, specifically her letters collected in the Cartas volume edited by Thomas Alvarez, as well as spiritual testimony records from the Descalced Carmelite archives in Avila that contain first-hand accounts from those she counseled between 1562 and 1582. Now back to the information. Not anger, but indifference. She said, most couples do not see it coming because it arrives disguised as normal life. You stop asking how their day went because you assume you already know. You stop sharing small thoughts because they seem too small to matter. You stop praying together because schedules got busy. One evening becomes 10 evenings. 10 evenings become a year. Before you notice, you're living parallel lives under the same roof. Teresa called this the temptation of the ordinary. She said the devil does not need to destroy love with drama. He just needs to make it boring. But Catalina told Teresa she felt like she was disappearing. She said Francisco treated her with politeness, the same politeness he used with his business partners. He never raised his voice. He never forgot an anniversary. But when she spoke, his eyes would glaze over. When she cried, he would ask what was wrong, then offer a solution and walk away. She told Teresa, I feel like I am standing next to a stranger who knows my name but not my heart. Teresa asked Catalina a single question. When was the last time you sat with him and did nothing but look at his face? Catalina could not answer. Teresa said, you have stopped seeing him, so he has stopped seeing you. Attention is the first act of love, and you have both forgotten how to give it. Teresa told her that marriage is not a contract that runs itself. It is a garden. If you stop watering it, even the strongest roots dry out. The problem was not that Francisco had changed. The problem was that neither of them had chosen to stay curious about the other. They had stopped asking new questions. They had stopped listening past the surface. They had started assuming they already knew everything. An assumption is where intimacy goes to die. No tasks, no children, no complaints. Just sit. Ask him one question you have never asked before. Listen without planning your response. Do not try to fix him or teach him. Just see him. Catalina thought it sounded too simple to matter, but she did it. The first week, Francisco looked at her like she had lost her mind. The second week, he started talking. By the fourth week, he told her things he had never said out loud, fears about his business, memories from childhood, doubts about whether he was a good father. Catalina wrote back to Teresa in April of 1574. She said, I thought I married a quiet man. I was wrong. I married a man I stopped listening to. T.C. Cat, April 1574. She referenced it years later when writing to another couple in Toledo who complained their marriage had gone silent. She told them, silence in marriage is not the absence of words, it is the absence of presence. You can talk all day and still be alone if neither of you is truly there. She noticed that many couples who drifted apart did so, not because they stopped loving each other, but because they started loving the idea of each other more than the reality. She wrote about this in a letter to her brother Lorenzo in 1577. She said people fall in love with a version of their spouse that exists only in their head, a version that never disappoints, never changes, never requires patience. Then they spend years being frustrated that the real person does not match the fantasy. Teresa called this the idol of comfort. She said, we want a spouse who makes life easier, not a spouse who makes us holier. And when they stop making life easier, we blame them for failing us, when the failure was ours for expecting them to be God. Maria had been married before entering the convent. Her husband had died young, and she told Teresa that even before his death, their marriage had felt like a slow erasure. She said they never fought, never cheated, never even raised their voices. But every year they spoke a little less. Every year the space between them grew a little wider. By the end, they were sleeping in the same bed but living in different worlds. Maria told Teresa, I thought marriage was supposed to be easy if you loved each other, but I learned that love does not keep itself alive. You have to feed it, or it starves in silence. They share a house, share a bed, share meals, share children, but they never go deeper. They never unlock the inner rooms where fear lives, where shame hides, where the truest version of the person waits to be known. Teresa said those rooms do not open by accident. They open only when you choose to ask the hard questions, to sit with the uncomfortable answers, to see your spouse not as they present themselves, but as they actually are. And most people never do that because it requires something most of us avoid: the humility to admit we do not know everything about the person we sleep next to every night. Some of those notes survived in a collection called Cuentas de Conciencia, Accounts of Conscience, written between 1560 and 1581. In one entry, dated 1575, she recorded a conversation with a married man from Valladolid named Pedro. Pedro told her his wife had become distant. She stopped touching him, stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped asking about his work. He assumed she had fallen out of love. He thought about leaving. But Teresa asked him, "When was the last time you asked her what she was afraid of?" Pedro looked confused. Teresa said, "Fear makes people retreat. Maybe she's not leaving you. Maybe she's protecting herself from something, and you have not noticed because you stopped paying attention." She told him she had suffered a miscarriage 6 months earlier and never fully grieved it because she thought he did not care. He had gone back to work the next day. He never asked how she felt. He never held her while she cried. She assumed his silence meant indifference, so she built a wall to survive the loneliness. Pedro had no idea. He thought his silence was strength, that returning to normal meant being strong for her. He did not realize that what she needed was not strength, but presence. Teresa wrote in her notes, "Most marriages do not die from malice. They die from misunderstanding left unspoken." The wife said her husband stayed up too late reading. Both reasons were true, but Teresa saw past them. She told them, "You are using small inconveniences to avoid intimacy. Sleeping apart is not the problem. It is the symptom. You have stopped choosing closeness because closeness requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels dangerous when you have stopped trusting each other." She told them to start small. Hold hands for 5 minutes before sleep, even if you sleep in different rooms. Pray together every morning, even if it is just one Our Father. Do not try to fix everything at once. Just stop drifting further. The moment you sigh instead of answering a question. The moment you assume you know what they will say, so you stop listening. Every one of those moments is a small brick in a wall that eventually becomes too high to see over. Teresa said in a letter to the Carmelite nuns in Segovia, dated June 1578, that the devil does not need to tempt you toward another person. He just needs to tempt you toward distraction. If he can keep you busy enough, distant enough, distracted enough, love will die on its own. He spoke to her the way a master speaks to a servant. Anna told Teresa she did not recognize him anymore. The man she married had been kind, gentle, full of laughter. Now he was cold and sharp, and she did not know what had changed. When he speaks, do you listen, or do you correct him? When he makes a decision, do you trust him, or do you undermine him in front of the children? Anna admitted she had started doing all those things, but she said it was because he had stopped being affectionate. Teresa said, "So you punished his distance with disrespect, and he punished your disrespect with more distance. You are both waiting for the other to move first, and meanwhile, the marriage is dying." But Teresa said, "Love is not fair. Love is a choice. You cannot control him, but you can control yourself. And sometimes, one person choosing love is enough to wake the other person up." By the 7th day, he brought her flowers for the first time in 3 years. Anna wrote to Teresa 2 months later. She said, "I thought he had stopped loving me, but the truth is, we had both stopped trying. I was waiting for him to be kind so I could respect him. He was waiting for me to respect him so he could be kind. We were both starving each other and blaming the other for the hunger." Teresa kept that letter in her personal correspondence, now archived in the monastery of San Jose in Avila under the index Ana Rodrigo Burgos 1580. She referenced it in a later instruction to the Carmelite prioresses, telling them that when counseling married women, always ask about respect before asking about love. She wrote, "A man can live without affection if he has respect. A woman can live without romance if she has presence. But neither can live without both for long, and most couples stop giving either without realizing it. They spoke only about logistics, children's schedules, household repairs, bills. They had not touched each other in over a year. They had not laughed together in longer than he could remember. He said it felt like living with a ghost." He asked Teresa if it was too late. "If you both choose to rebuild, you can, but it will not happen by accident. You will have to grieve what was lost. You will have to forgive what was done and what was not done. You will have to start over, not as the people you were, but as the people you are now. And that is harder than starting fresh with someone new, because you carry all the wounds and disappointments. But it is also richer because you carry all the history and the knowledge of what you survived together. Not about problems or plans, but about your souls. Ask each other, what are you afraid of? What do you dream about? What do you need from me that you are not getting? Listen without defending yourself. Speak without blaming. Treat each confession like a gift, because it is. Adultery or abandonment. It was the quiet resignation of two people who stay together but stop trying." She said, "Hell is not always fire. Sometimes It is two people sitting in the same room, year after year, in total silence, waiting for death to end what they no longer have the courage to fight for. She said, that kind of hell is worse than separation, because separation at least ends the lie. But staying together without love is a living blasphemy against the sacrament. Pride makes you shut down instead of speaking up. She said, if you want your marriage to live, kill your pride first. Admit when you're wrong. Ask for forgiveness even when you think you're right. Choose humility over being understood, and watch how fast walls come down. Teresa's advice on marriage. Beatrice said Teresa once told her, marriage is the fastest path to holiness because it forces you to die to yourself every single day. You cannot hide in marriage. You cannot pretend to be holy when someone sees you at your worst every morning. Your spouse knows your sins better than your confessor. They know your selfishness, your impatience, your pride, and that is exactly why God gave you to each other, not to make you comfortable, but to make you saints. Every moment of frustration was an invitation to patience. Every moment of distance was an invitation to pursue. Every moment of misunderstanding was an invitation to listen harder. And if they ran from those invitations, they would carry the same brokenness into the next relationship. Because the problem was not the spouse. The problem was the refusal to be transformed by love. Teresa died on October 4th, 1582, in Alba de Tormes, exhausted from decades of travel, reform, and spiritual warfare. She was 67 years old. In her final hours, she asked the nuns around her to pray for married couples. She said they carry a weight the world does not see. They fight battles in silence. They bear wounds no one acknowledges. And most of them believe they are alone in their struggle, when the truth is almost everyone is struggling. She said the devil's greatest lie is that other marriages are easy, that other couples do not fight or drift or fall silent. She wanted people to know the truth. Every marriage is hard. Every marriage requires daily choice. Every marriage will go through seasons of winter, but winter does not mean death. It means waiting for spring, and spring always comes if you do not abandon the field. In it, Teresa writes, you tell me your husband has become a stranger, but I ask you, have you become a stranger to yourself? Most women lose themselves in marriage, and then they resent their husbands for not seeing them when they themselves have stopped looking inward. You cannot ask him to know you if you do not know yourself. You cannot ask him to cherish you if you do not cherish your own soul. The drift begins not when he stops seeing you, but when you stop being someone worth seeing. Teresa said the only way to break that cycle is for one person to stop keeping score and start giving freely. Not because the other deserves it, not because it is fair, but because love is not a transaction. Love is a gift, and gifts are given without expecting return. They say, I just want us to be happy. But what they mean is, I want you to make me happy without me having to change. They say, I need space. But what they mean is, I want distance without accountability. They say, we have grown apart. But what they mean is, I stopped choosing you, and I do not want to admit it. Teresa had no patience for that kind of self-deception. She told people the truth even when it stung. She said, you did not grow apart. You walked apart. Growth is something that happens to you. Walking is something you do. And if you walked away, you can walk back, but only if you stop pretending it happened by accident. They perform roles, but they never walk into the inner rooms where silence lives, where the soul reveals itself, where true intimacy happens. She said those inner rooms are dark and quiet and require courage to enter. You have to leave behind your defenses. You have to admit your fears. You have to let yourself be fully seen, and that is terrifying. But that is also where love deepens. That is where marriage becomes a sacrament and not just a contract. And they call that maturity, when really it is just fear dressed up as wisdom. Teresa said, do not lie to yourself. If your marriage has gone cold, it is not because love fades with time. It is because you stopped feeding the fire, and fire does not sustain itself. The husband, a landowner named Esteban, told Teresa that he and his wife had a good marriage. They did not fight. They worked well together. They raised their children in the faith. But his wife, Marta, sat silent the whole time. When Teresa asked her if she agreed, Marta looked at the floor and said, we have a good arrangement. Not a good marriage. An arrangement. Teresa asked Esteban to leave the room. Then she asked Marta, what do you mean? Marta said, I gave up hoping he would see me years ago. I do my duties. He does his. We are polite, we are responsible, but I feel like I am invisible. I could disappear tomorrow, and as long as the house ran smoothly, he would not notice. Fight. You have replaced intimacy with efficiency, and you call it peace. But it is not peace. It is death. She told them that a marriage without conflict is often a marriage without honesty, because honesty requires risk, and risk requires caring about the outcome. She said, start fighting, not with cruelty, but with truth. Tell each other what you actually feel. Stop pretending everything is fine. Stop managing each other like business partners and start loving each other like spouses. And that means admitting when you are hurt, lonely, afraid, or angry. She told them to go home and for 1 month practice what she called ruthless honesty. Every evening, sit together and each person says one true thing they have been avoiding. No punishment, no retaliation, just truth. Let the truth create space for change. But the next night, he admitted he felt the same. He said he felt like a workhorse, valued only for what he provided, not for who he was. They both cried. For the first time in years, they were not pretending. The letter is preserved in the Carmelite archives under reference Marta Esteban 1576. Marta wrote, "We had to break before we could heal, and the breaking hurt, but the healing was worth it." Teresa died believing that marriage was one of the highest callings, not because it was easy, but because it demanded everything. She told her nuns that she did not envy married people for their freedom. She envied them for their daily opportunity to practice sacrificial love. She said, "You think the convent is holier because we pray more, but married people pray with their lives. Every act of patience is a prayer. Every act of forgiveness is a prayer. Every morning they wake up and choose their spouse again, even when they do not feel like it. That is a prayer God hears louder than words. Love is a decision you make alive. Feelings will come and go. Passion will rise and fall. There will be seasons where you like your spouse and seasons where you do not. That is normal. What matters is that in every season, you choose to honor the covenant. You choose to show up. You choose to serve, to forgive, to pursue, to stay. And if you do that long enough, the feelings return. Not the same feelings you had at the beginning, but deeper ones, rooted not in novelty, but in faithfulness." She said, "You are not struggling because you made a mistake. You are struggling because you are finally seeing each other as you really are, and reality is always harder than fantasy. The first year is when the illusion dies. That does not mean the marriage is dying. It means the real marriage is finally beginning. Stop trying to get back to the honeymoon. That is over. Start building something better, something that does not depend on butterflies, but on choice." She said, "Marriage is not about finding the right person. It is about being the right person. And you become the right person not by demanding change from your spouse, but by letting God change you through your spouse." Louis said Teresa had saved his marriage by telling him one sentence. She said, "Your wife is not your enemy. She is your mirror. Whatever you hate in her is something you refuse to see in yourself." Louis wrote that he had spent years blaming his wife for being critical, controlling, anxious. But when Teresa said that, he realized he was all those things too. He just could not see it until his wife reflected it back to him. He wrote, "Teresa taught me that marriage is not about fixing your spouse. It is about letting your spouse reveal what needs fixing in you." She told them what they needed to hear. She did not give them easy answers or quick fixes. She gave them the truth, and the truth was almost always the same. Stop waiting for your spouse to change and start changing yourself. Stop blaming your spouse for the distance and start closing it. Stop resenting your spouse for not meeting your needs and start asking God to meet them. Stop using your spouse as an excuse for your unhappiness and start taking responsibility for your own soul. They stop choosing presence over distraction. They stop humbling themselves. They stop forgiving quickly. They stop serving freely. And they convince themselves that the problem is compatibility or timing or personality, when the real problem is that they stop trying. It is undated, but scholars believe it was written sometime in 1581. It says, "The saddest souls I meet are not the ones who never married. They are the ones who married and then slowly, quietly gave up. They share a life, but not a soul. They speak, but do not say anything true. They sleep side by side, but dream alone. They call it commitment, but it is just coexistence. And they die that way. Two people who could have known each other completely, but chose safety over intimacy, comfort over growth, silence over truth. That is the real tragedy. Not the marriages that end, but the marriages that continue without life. It creeps in through 1,000 small neglects, 1,000 unanswered questions, 1,000 moments where you chose ease over effort, silence over speech, assumption over curiosity. And by the time you notice, the gap feels impossible to close. But Teresa insisted it is never impossible if both people are willing to walk back toward each other, to tear down the walls brick by brick, to start again with humility and honesty and the terrifying vulnerability of being fully seen. Do not let your couples settle for excuses. Teach them that love is a decision made new every morning, and every morning is a chance to choose again. Unmistakable. She understood the anatomy of marital drift with a clarity that anticipated modern psychology by 400 years. And her prescription was always the same. Stop waiting and start walking. Walk toward your spouse even when they do not walk toward you. Walk with humility, honesty, and the belief that God is present in the struggle, refining both of you into something holier than you could become alone. In 1581, 1 year before her death, Teresa received a letter from Catalina de Tolosa, the woman from Salamanca she had counseled 8 years earlier. Catalina wrote that she and Francisco had just celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. She said they were not the same people they were when they first came to Teresa. They had been through illness, financial loss, the death of a child, but they had not drifted. She said, "You taught us that marriage is not about staying the same. It is about changing together. We do not love the way we did at 20. We love better, deeper, with more truth and less illusion, and I would not trade that for anything. And the moment you stop neglecting it, the moment you choose again to see, to listen, to ask, to give, love begins to breathe again. Not the same love you started with, but a stronger one, tempered by failure and faithful choice, by the daily decision to walk toward each other when every instinct says to walk away.